good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. I'm Dan Waltham, GRC Account Director here at Corporator. You may remember me from such webinars as Why Governance Matters, which was run with my colleague Uwe last week. I'm joined today by my colleague Paul Greenhouse. Do you want to say hi, Paul?
Hi everyone, Paul Greenhouse. I'm the Director of Pre-Sales at Corporator, UK and I.
So Paul and I will be guiding you through today's webinar. We expect to probably be talking for around 45 minutes, presenting a number of slides in the chosen topic, securing resilience in your extended enterprise. As discussed, the topic today is securing resilience in your extended enterprise. Quick question, let's just test out the Q&A facility, if we may. How many people on the call are involved in third-party risk management or resilience in some way, shape or form in their organization? If you can just ping a quick Y or N in the Q&A, that would be very, very helpful. Great, thank you. So that's 100% of, oh, hold on, someone's put one in the chat. Oh, we're down to 90%. So 90% of the people on today's webinar are involved in third-party risk management. So of those that answered yes, how many of you are confident that you have been able to identify all of the critical third parties who are working with your organization? Just a Y or an N again would be great in the Q&A. Okay, so we're down to about 50% of those people who have answered yes to looking after third-party risk, are confident they've been able to identify all of their critical third parties. Final question, and then I'll get on with doing some work myself. How many of those who said yes to identifying their main third parties or the critical third parties are confident that they understand the sub suppliers to those third parties? So how many people understand fourth parties in the organization? Again, a quick Y or M will be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much. So that number has dropped again. So we've probably seen about 50% of the people who answered yes to looking after third-party risk were confident that they'd identified all of their critical third parties. And then we're seeing then about 50% of that. So probably 25% of the total audience here today have been confident in identifying their fourth parties, i.e. their extended enterprise. And that's why we feel it's such a timely conversation today, with all of the rhetoric around regulation, around third-party supplier risk. Secure and resilience in the extended enterprise has never been more valuable. So we're going to be talking to you today, introducing the concepts of the extended enterprise, very brief conceptual discussion around operational resilience, and then we're going to be diving into the importance of identifying vulnerabilities, risks, and vendors in that supply chain. First of all, though, let me just hand over to Paul for a quick word from our sponsors, i.e. our firm, Corporator. So let me click on Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's just a very quick overview of who we are. We are Corporator. We're a global company. We've got 10 offices. I think we might have just opened our 11th. They're across the globe. We've been around for about 25 years now. And we go to market with a single platform that has a single code base. What we do is link GRC, governance, risk, compliance, to business outcomes and strategy. This links risk management to company performance. So we like to say we add the P to GRC, so adding performance to governance, risk, compliance to make governance, performance, risk, and compliance, if you will. Our business integrated approach helps firms reduce the total cost of ownership of risk and regulatory ownership. So what makes us unique is that we look at things from this performance point of view, so this GPRC. We view risks in the business context, linking GRC to strategies, initiatives, KPIs, objectives, and goals, all on a single platform, a single database. So the aim is to increase efficiency, to digitize and automate operations, reducing the time invested in manual processes by over 70%, providing a single source of the truth, allowing data visualization across all the domains, breaking down these silos that you find in the companies all the time to find efficiencies and unlock data. So that's quite enough about us. Dan, back to you for the extended enterprise.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So what is the extended enterprise? So of course we have an official definition. I'm just going to grab my tome of literature here. So this is according to the Institute of Risk Management. Our definition of the extended enterprise is one in which a number of organizations come together in order to achieve some outcomes that none of them can achieve on their own within the timescale within which they wish to operate with the skills available to them. So let's translate that just a little bit for you. So we've got your firm here, or the enterprise here on the left-hand side. We've got the outcome on the right, and the suppliers that support you in achieving that outcome are in the middle. And it can be any one of these collection of suppliers may help you achieve a certain outcome. That outcome can be internal or external. It can be a product or a service, and it's that collection of suppliers that help you deliver those services that's known as the extended enterprise. Now, it's important to note actually that not necessarily the outcome that you're achieving on the right or the services or processes that the suppliers are delivering are going to be completely outsourced. They could just be very small parts, very small processes in a much bigger process, most of which is delivered by you. But this is collectively known as the extended enterprise. So why is it valuable to firms? We all know the reasons here. You know, half of the room is involved in third-party risk. So efficiency, cost saving, they can do it better than you can do it. For firms, particularly in the fintech space, they've been able to scale very, very quickly by using the extended enterprise to help deliver services and products to market at a much quicker scale. Also, there's some benefit to be gained from an ESG and sustainability perspective. So hopefully that's pretty clear to everyone. What about operational resilience? Just apologies here. I think my background's gone grey, so apologies. The formatting doesn't look so good. So I'm going to be using mainly financial services terms today when we're talking about resilience. Really, that's where the most formalized thinking is around operational resilience. So again, we've got a formal definition from the UK's FCA and PRA, Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulatory Authority. They define operational resilience as the ability of firms and the financial sector to prevent, adapt, respond to, recover from, and learn from operational disruptions. So introducing some quite good concepts here. The first thing is that operational resilience assumes that disruptions are going to occur. Secondly, we're focused on severe but plausible disruptions. Really, those everyday incidents, those minor issues, they should be dealt with by firms' risk and control or incident management framework. Thirdly, we're focused primarily on services. The FCA and PRA regulation is primarily concerned with externally facing, customer-facing services, but other regulations across the world are also thinking about internally facing services or critical business functions, as they're known in several regulations around the world. And then we're introducing this concept of harm. material detriment, intolerable harm, material harm, call it what you will. And what we're trying to do, if the incident or disruption happens down here on the timeline, we can see that fairly quickly we're achieving harm to the customer, and fairly shortly afterwards we're reaching the point where that impact tolerance, that detriment, that harm threshold is breached, and then the incident goes beyond that. So the concept of resilience is we're trying to move from the dark blue line to the light blue line. We're trying to reduce the impact through resilience, preventative resilience measures, through adaptive workarounds, through response and recovery strategies, so that at its height, a severe but plausible scenario may only cause harm to the clients, to the internal service users of that service. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. Now, what are the benefits of resilience? So as we can see, it's beneficial to clients, and certainly in an environment where services are expected to be on 24/7, 365, you want to ensure that your clients are protected. It defends reputation, actually builds reputation. If you can show that you've got resilient services, if you're a resilient organization, then you're much more likely to attract new clients. It helps you keep pace with others in the market. But many firms were building resilience as a competitive advantage. But actually, now that most firms, certainly in the UKFS market, are implementing some form of resilience, it's now much more about keeping pace. So it's now a competitive disadvantage if you don't have resilience. So it's about keeping pace with others in your market. And then finally, as an old resilience and BCM colleague of mine, very long in the tooth around BCM and operational resilience, he said it helps you keep the profits that you've already earned. So as we know, responding to incidents can be extremely expensive. In my days as a BCM and resilience consultant, we worked with a client who had one single 4-hour outage. It actually impacted a very small group of customers. However, that one outage cost them £100,000, £50,000 to return the customers to the state they were in previously. This was an investment business, and £50,000 to get the technology firm to get a technology consultancy to come in and actually fix the issue. So it introduces the concept of the 6 pillars: suppliers, facilities, data, technology, process, and people. And then as you start to mature your resilience, you will start to connect the resources, the controls, the people within those pillars to create a resilient organization. And then as you get more mature, you'll start to incorporate other domains outside of the regulatory question here, certainly in the UK, that the regulator responds to FCA PRA regulation. You'll start to think about holistic resilience. And it's at this point you start to think, okay, actually, what does it mean to be resilient as an organization rather than just compliant with the regulation? So hopefully that aligns with everybody's or most people's understanding on the core. As I say, this is a very FS focused example. Okay, so why are we talking about securing the resilience of the extended enterprise? Why? What? What's the so what bit behind it? So in July 2024, we saw the CrowdStrike incident. I don't really want to harp on about this one. It's an easy one to grab, but it impacted nearly 9 million firms across multiple countries, multiple industries, including some pretty significant organizations, banks, stock markets crashed. So there's example number one. Last year, a security resilience firm, a technology firm called Black Kite, produced a report where they stated that over half of resilience incidents they responded to were in their client base were as a direct result of third-party or fourth-party failure in the supply chain. And then in Deloitte's recent extended enterprise survey from a little bit earlier this year, I think it was February this year, they surveyed some of the largest firms actually globally, and they found that only 40% of respondents in that survey felt that supply chain resilience of the extended enterprise, was a firm priority. So over half of the largest firms surveyed, these are over half of the largest firms globally, are not placing resilience of the extended enterprise as a business priority. But so what? Why is it actually important that the extended enterprise is resilient? So we've got the same diagram here, firm on the left, product, service, outcome on the right. And then we've got the third parties here that are delivering that service. We also might have fourth parties as denoted by the cross here. So those same suppliers that you're using to deliver your service, your products, are also exposed to their own risks, threats, vulnerabilities. And those risks, threats, and vulnerabilities have the ability to impact on your service delivery. And because the concept of service delivery is across the entire supply chain, the receiver of this outcome may not be aware that it's not you, that it's not you that's delivering the service. They're going to assume that it's Acme Bank over here that's delivering this entire service. They don't know there's lots of little dots in between. And so the impact is actually on you as an organization. And so that's why securing resilience of the extended enterprise is so important. The impact comes back to the organization. That can then bleed into the market through contagion risk, of course. Okay, so what happens when the extended enterprise is not resilient? For Paul's benefit, doesn't recognize any celebrities globally. This is Will Ferrell, quite timely. Probably most people will be watching Elf at this time of year. So in honor of Will, let's ask a little joke. I'll ask you a little joke, Paul. What do a fish tank and a palm tree have in common?
I think I'm going to have to pass on that one, Dan. I don't know.
Okay, so they're both examples of resilience vulnerabilities or potential resilience vulnerabilities in a firm's extended enterprise. So the fish tank one is pretty well known. Back in, I think, 2017 or 2018, a US casino was hacked. So the hackers accessed the casino's network, stole a ton of data, and the casino had to pay ransomware to or ransom to get that data back. The hackers accessed the casino's network via an IoT fish tank that was connected to the casino's main network. It hadn't been properly secured, and so they were able to gain access to the network and steal the data that way. We've also seen incidents involving air conditioning units, exactly the same kind of thing. The palm tree, now to my knowledge, this one hasn't actually been exploited yet, so I don't want to be spreading ideas here, but a previous colleague of mine had the fortunate advantage to meet the CISO of Dubai. So Dubai has its own CISO. And in that meeting, the CISO of Dubai said that every single palm tree in Dubai has its own IP address. So it's effectively an internet device, and they need these IP addresses. They need to be monitored for moisture to make sure they're healthy, because obviously they're supplanted there. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility, the CISO was saying, that some bad actor in shorts, flip-flops, and a vest might not just plop down with their Mac underneath a palm tree and gain access to the palm tree, and if that's not being properly secured, could gain access to the main network of Dubai. So a couple of fun little examples there. Don't worry, I've got some solid data to back these ideas up. So a couple of years ago, the ESRB, which is the European Systemic Risk Board, carried out a number of surveys for firms across 14 EU member states. Now, these were financial services, non-financial services, but some of the most significant firms across the EU. And they asked these firms in these countries to self-identify the most common vulnerabilities in their organization. So as we can see, top of the pile here is insufficient oversight of third-party suppliers and supply chain. They then went one step further and they tracked those commonly identified vulnerabilities, or they asked firms to track those commonly identified vulnerabilities to incidents that had occurred, to cyber incidents, as we can see here. And the most common cause of cyber incidents in firms was insufficient oversight, third-party suppliers and supply chain, i.e. third-party suppliers, fourth-party suppliers, the extended enterprise. And as we can see actually here, I think there are, just looking at the numbers on my sheet in front of me, there are probably 4 or 5 here that you could say, okay, if we improve the resilience of the extended enterprise, then actually we're going to be able to improve the resilience of the overall organization. And then finally, I quite like this this graphic here. So this really shows the level of importance that those firms surveyed placed on the supervision of these risks and vulnerabilities in their organization. So it's good to see that 2 firms, you can see my pointer at the top here, 2/3 of member states, this was aggregated at a member state level, felt that oversight of third-party suppliers and supply chain was important. Not sure what the other third are thinking. Maybe they don't outsource so much there. Also, I thought was really interesting here that only half of the firms really surveyed are thinking about testing as a way to identify and hopefully mitigate some of the vulnerabilities. So what can be done about it? What do we need to do to secure the resilience of the extended enterprise? It's a pretty straightforward process, I think. The actual doing of it, and it's very easy to draw it out here, but I've done this several times in firms, and the actual doing of it, the gaining buy-in from the different stakeholders in an organization to get this work done is and can be and is extremely challenging for the most part. But we've got a 3-step process, all underpinned or overpinned in this diagram by strategy and governance, which I'll come back to in a second. And really here, what we're seeing is it's a bit of an ISO 31000 ripoff. It really sets a very good standard. So we're starting with context. We're identifying where we're sat in that supply chain. We're then assessing and segmenting the risks according to the damage they may do to us as an organization, or their impact, I should say. And then we're saying, okay, what oversight measures, what assurance do we need to put in place? So actually, it's a fairly standard risk management process, but I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. I said I'd start with the strategy though, so let me just come back to that one. So in my experience of working on risk, resilience, third-party risk management programs, see the lack of strategy as being one of the first things that often we went in to fix. So the strategy does many things when we're talking about risk management regulatory programs. It provides an articulation of desired target state, i.e., how is the extended enterprise going to feed into organizational goals? The strategy helps determine the gap between our current state and our target state. It provides crystal clarity on remediation and investment decisions. It helps articulate objectives and expectations. If it's been done properly, it aligns with company strategy and objectives and business strategy, and we're getting those by design concepts in there if we're able to do that. And if it's been done properly, it should be set by the firm's top management, and therefore that should set the tone for culture. But perhaps most importantly, it answers the question, how resilient do we want to be? And who is going to be responsible for that? So not just one person, as many firms in the UK are now finding out. It's not the SMF24, the COO, the CIO. It's not the head of operational resilience. Resilience, much like risk management, is a collective endeavor. Quick point on this target state here. And I think often the firms that I've talked to strategy about say, we're too small for a strategy. You know, we're only 200 people, we're 500 people, we're 1,000 people. Why do we need a resilient strategy? But actually, the strategy, it's scalable and it should be proportionate based on the size of your business, the kinds of customers you work with, the complexity of the products, the markets in which you operate, the general risk appetite and risk tolerance levels of the business. And then underpinning the strategy, underpinning your move towards this strategy should be a governance framework. You've got to define, okay, how is all of this going to be managed and tracked? How are we going to monitor our progress towards the achievement of strategy? And that's where good governance comes in, as Urva noted in last week's webinar. How are decisions on things like threshold breaches and associated action plans noted and maintained? And how are we tracking policy deviations and exceptions? And who makes the call on whether we're close to breaching some of these tolerances? All of those things need to be documented in a strategy. And the final thing about strategy is actually often for practitioners, I've had the feedback that the strategy is pretty woolly. You know, we need to be out there rolling our sleeves up and doing the work. Strategy shouldn't be woolly. It should be completely the opposite of that. Everything in your strategy should be measured in some way. It should be time bound. It should have metrics placed against it. Otherwise, it really does become quite woolly. Okay, so that's strategy. So if you remember, the first thing here was position and context. So I'll just skip onto that here. So really the first step in any risk management process, and certainly in the resilience process, once you've identified business services, is to understand the ecosystem in which we're operating. You want to understand, okay, what are the mission critical assets or resources that exist in delivery of this process? Where do they exist? How do they interact with each other? How do they flow across this extended enterprise ecosystem? And once we understand that, that's going to enable a risk-based approach and will enable us to really hone in on what's important. It's very simple, actually. How do we do it? Well, first of all, we identify our services. We identify the processes which underpin those services or which support those services. We identify the resources below here which underpin those service delivery processes. We identify owners of the resources and processes, and then we document and visualize how all of those things fit together. That can be in as something as basic as an Excel. Next level up is something like a Visio, and Paul's going to show you a little bit about what that might look like in an enterprise level software tool. Starting with position and context, it will help you identify all of your dependencies on third parties and hopefully fourth parties. It will help you spot where you've got concentration risk in the organization. It's going to support resilience risk identification. It's going to let you know where you've got vulnerabilities, where you might have single points of failure or key person dependencies. In fact, it was only through this mapping process with a large bank did we identify that they were on a large legacy mainframe system, and anyone that's tried to replace a legacy mainframe will know it's extremely expensive. They had two people that supported that mainframe who were both nearing retirement age, and both of those people were actively pursuing retirement. But every year the bank just offered them a little bit more money to stay on for another year. So they couldn't train up any newer people coming through to pick up the skills and training of the mainframe. And so really that they weren't single points of failure, there were 2 points of failure, but they were having to work to find a solution pretty quickly to that. Now, very quick word on mapping and asset identification in general. Often it's overlooked, but it is a vital part of the process. And if you look at frameworks like NIST, ISO 27001, the ESRB's conceptual cyber framework, which we referenced before. All of those put asset in the first pillar. So one of the most important pillars, because it helps you understand what's absolutely critical and what do you need to do to keep the most basic service running, to keep the lights on, and help you understand where you're vulnerable. Okay, so a couple of ways, 2 or 3 ways, depending on how you skin the cat, that you might look at mapping. So we've got top-down approach. So here we're identifying our services or our critical business functions. I'm saying, okay, what are the processes and resources which underpin those critical or important functions? And we're mapping it that way. And then we're determining how critical those resources are to the delivery of that service or function. You can also do it bottom up, which I think it really does align with this asset first idea that we've just talked about in NIST, etc. So here you're identifying all of your resources in the organization, in this case, all of the 3rd, 4th, nth party resources, i.e. your extended enterprise. And you're saying, okay, how do these resources support the processes in our organization? We then map those processes to services. So then you've got a really clear picture of, okay, we've got this one 3rd party resource down here, but actually it plays a part in 4 or 5 different services. And that's why I think that the bottom up approach really reflects certainly what regulators want to see, but also I think some of the standards. Mapping is a pretty big job, it must be said, to be done correctly. So word of advice here is to leverage what you might have in place already, particularly with 3rd and 4th parties. Have you got an ITDR systems criticality matrix, for example? Have you got BIAs which might have already identified some of these resources? Could you leverage existing change management projects? It seems many firms have gone through a significant technology change program over the last couple of years. So a lot of that work is process mapping to begin with. And if you're lucky enough to have an operational resilience program, what mapping can you leverage there to secure your extended enterprise? Okay. This is a very recent publication. I think it was only last week, wasn't it, Paul, that the FCA put out their lessons learned from the CrowdStrike incident. So what I really liked here was they actually took their time to survey multiple firms, large and small firms, to understand, okay, what was the fallout from CrowdStrike and what are the lessons that can be applied to, yes, financial services businesses in their case, but I think these are relevant for everyone else. So I'm just going to read from their report here, if that's okay. So mapping important business services and the resources necessary to deliver these services allowed firms to prioritize getting key services back online to reduce the overall impact an incident had on their operation. So let's map the business services, map the resources which underpin those. Secondly, identify single points of failure within, or those firms that identified single points of failure within their infrastructure or technology stack, and identified changes, investments, and actions that were needed to improve those ahead of the CrowdStrike incident, were able to respond much more quickly. And because they'd identified those single points of failure, where they hadn't been able to invest or remediate, they at least had a little bit more of a robust workaround process that in fact had been tested. Testing was another key thing. They found that those firms who had conducted detailed mapping of 3rd party, 4th party, nth party relationships, the extended enterprise, were able to understand their exposure much more quickly to this incident and take actions to mitigate the damage. And then finally, for those firms that had done step 3, as part of that process, they were able to set up specific relationships or communication pathways, communication channels, which allowed them to rapidly communicate with incident response teams, business continuity teams in their 3rd party, 4th party, and nth party vendors. And they were able to collectively respond much quicker to to an outage. In fact, if you just Google FCA CrowdStrike lessons, you'll find the report. It provides some really, really good examples in there. So well worth 10, 15 minutes of your time to read that. Okay, so that's me for a moment. I'm going to hand over to Paul just to pick up from here.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so your enterprise, your organization, and Dan's talked eloquently about the extended enterprise. Just thought it might be worth focusing for a moment on what's going on around us, because the world of business has changed dramatically over the last few decades. We're living in a connected society where change can be fast-paced, is constant, and is unpredictable. There's rapid advances in technology that have created an environment where internet, smartphones, and social media are ubiquitous. Global events such as financial crisis, COVID pandemic, conflicts in Ukraine and Palestine, not to mention the events yesterday in Korea. This all have increased the sense of turbulence and danger and unpredictability. So this state of flux has replaced the sense of certainty, stability, and familiarity that people were used to. So this type of environment can be described using the rather unfortunate acronym of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So the world is changing, as we said. We've got external factors are driving change. We've got new and high velocity risks are emerging that could impact our business and our supply chains. And we need visibility of these risks. We need the ability to monitor and assess them, to understand their impact on us, and we need the flexibility to deal with them in an agile manner. We build our organization, so we set our strategy, we define the objectives that are designed to meet that strategy. We monitor or define and monitor KPIs to understand our progress against those objectives. And we put in place processes that add value and drive forward those KPIs or objectives. And these are looked after by the various different departments within an organization. Next slide, next click. Add to that, we've got the projects. We've got iterative projects. We've got ideation projects coming along. We've got assets both in the cloud and on premise. And then we've got those third parties that Dan's been talking about, that's more fourth parties and so on. Next click, if you would, please, Dan. We add to that the regulatory landscape. So all these different regulations that are coming along and seem to be on a almost weekly basis. And we've got our management functions that are trying to ensure that we meet our goals, that we adhere to our culture, that we understand our responsibilities, that our processes are run appropriately, and that we manage to stick to the guidelines. One more click. This is where an integrated GRC, or if you will, GPRC solution can help you identify risks and threats, assess them, evaluate them, and then control and monitor them. And then what this allows, 2 clicks please, Dan, is us to look across our extended enterprise through various different lenses of maybe financial, maybe compliance or security, understand where, one more click, where we have vulnerabilities and where we should focus our efforts to get to the most efficient use of our time and resources. So this is just a quick look at how you might want to visualize these complex ecosystems, these different interconnections between different elements. So in this example, we've got in the middle a service, which of course claims management. And then with that, we've got all the process steps that are involved in delivering that service. And then on the far left-hand side, you've got all the different resources required to deliver each of those process steps. And you can have a very similar way of visualizing a third-party supply chain. We have third and fourth parties and all their interconnections. So it allows you to visualize this complexity, to see the interconnections, and then you can, of course, on a click, you can drill down to the detail and see similar sort of levels, similar ways of visualizing more detailed information and data. Next slide, thank you. And then within this, the idea, of course, is being to reduce the redundancy, to drive efficiency, and to simplify the GPRC landscape. So here we got an example of a control, and a control that is linked to many different requirements. So we've got 4 different requirements it's linked to. It's linked to 4 different areas of compliance with 3 different regulations we have to comply to. And then at the bottom there, you see 2 legal entities. So the idea here is we map once, we test once, and then we can comply many. That's delivering those efficiencies. One more click, please, Dan. And then just a quick example of what happens when you do not understand your full supply chain, when there are holes in that information, or where you cannot retrieve that data quickly. And that's what happened with the Move It incident. Was that almost a year ago now? People didn't understand that Move It was part of their supply chain. They had no idea, never mind having done the appropriate due diligence and monitored vulnerabilities and reacted to them. This is what happens if you don't have that full holistic view of your organization and those supply chains in the extended enterprise. Over
Thanks,
to you, Dan.
Paul. Yeah, and just another example to break up the slide deck. So another incident here in the UK. We seem to be producing quite a lot of these. So cast your minds back, if you will, to certainly for those of us in the UK, a slightly warmer time, May bank holiday earlier this year. It was May Day, so Monday evening, people flying back from a week overseas or a long weekend away. But every person that landed on the Monday evening in any UK airport, they were met with enormous queues. So the e-passport gates, where you grab your passport, you scan it, you look at the camera, let them through, they'd all stopped working, or they'd been shut down basically because they weren't working properly. So as I said, you can imagine the chaos, enormous queues, people desperate to get back to work, get home to get back to work the next day, screaming kids, probably stag parties coming back. It was it would have just been an absolute picture of chaos, I think, in airports. Paul, do you remember why the e-passport gates were down for 4 hours at peak time?
This one I do know, only because you told me a few weeks back. There was a Wi-Fi connectivity with a database, I believe.
That's the one, yeah. So this was a single Wi-Fi outage at UK Border Force head office that had caused a key database to be knocked out. Fortunately, this database was the one which communicated with the passport gates to say whether this person or that person entering the UK posed a security risk. So it was a single Wi-Fi, single point of failure linked to a Wi-Fi connection to a database, and it just hadn't been spotted or mitigated. And why do I think it hadn't? It just was completely unknown. It was because the manual workarounds, the workarounds to the process were just completely inadequate. They weren't able to get enough staff. There weren't enough staff on call. Some of the staff that would have been available to go in were actually in these queues trying to get home. Others didn't have access to transport to get into work. So it was just completely unknown. So a couple of nice examples there of what might happen. I'm suggesting really if they'd known about that, and presumably now there's a much better workaround, probably not only change Wi-Fi providers, but have a slightly more robust connection in place. Okay, so let me just cast your minds back to, where are we? This slide here. So we're talking about position and context. We're now on to assess and segment. So I'm just going to go back down here. So assess and segment. So what we're looking to do as part of this phase, part of this stage of our process, is say, okay, how important is this third party in the context of our organization specifically, and how important is this third party in the context of service delivery? And depending on your decision, you have a pretty solid methodology in place to determine that. And and depending on where the supplier fell, this is a simple model that I employed lots and lots of times. You have critical suppliers, strategic suppliers, tactical and transactional suppliers. Depending on where that supplier falls, determines the level of governance that you have in place. It determines the level of due diligence, determines your risk appetite and risk tolerance for things to go on. It determines the level of controls and treatments that you put in place. It tells you, okay, how often do we need to oversee? Do we need to go in and audit this supplier every 6 months or every 12 months to gain assurance? And again, this all needs to be regularly reviewed. In a KPMG study, this is going back a few years, but I think still relevant. They found that the third-party risk programs, about 80% of the budget for third-party risk programs goes into the due diligence phase of the work. 20% therefore is reserved for the ongoing monitoring of that relationship. And you can see where I'm going here. The incidents don't ever occur before you've onboarded a supplier. They always occur 2 or 3 years into the relationship, when oversight or assurance has been forgotten about as suppliers of and firms have got comfortable with working with each other. So the FCA is saying that you need to regularly review those. And again, I'm just going to read from their report, if I may. So you need to identify if changes may be required to your third-party categorization, risk assessment and management processes due to the potential or actual impact of the incident. You also need to make sure that you regularly review vendors' performance, service levels, contractual obligations, continuity arrangements and exit plans against your resilience requirements for third parties and remediate any gaps required. So we've got to stay on top of these third party relationships, and we've got to also place that expectation at the door of our third parties to do the same with their fourth parties. Often what we see as the relationship gets comfortable is supplier risk management becomes supplier management, and the element of identifying and managing risk goes out the window as everyone kind of gets used to working with each other. Okay, so here are some high level considerations and tactics. I'm not going to go through all of them. That the yellow that I've highlighted here again goes back to the FCA's findings, and they found that firms who had reviewed vendors' performance, so contractual arrangements and SLAs, had established very, very strong contracts setting out responsibilities. Firms who regularly tested with their third parties were able to respond much more quickly, were able to demonstrate much more resilience to incidents like CrowdStrike. The technology architecture one I thought was absolutely fascinating. Now, this is not going to be possible for all firms, but they found that firms who responded really well have considered various ways in which to ensure resilience in their infrastructure, such as procuring systems on different builds and different devices with different operating systems. So again, I thought that was very, very interesting. And others have considered updating change management processes for third parties who have got deep level system access. Sorry, keep looking down. I'm just reading directly from the report. They're can be quite formal, so I want to make sure I get the words right there. Final point here, which is always my favorite one to highlight, is BCM and exit plans. And this really is the biggest gap in my experience when it comes to securing resilience in the extended enterprise. We saw in an excellent recent paper that was run between S-Code, who the firm which invented escrow, software escrow, and CEFPRO, who is a risk management organization. They published a joint paper where they surveyed firms in their membership group around third-party risk management, and part of that survey was around business continuity and exit plans. They found that only about 20% of firms that they surveyed are adopting anything close to good practice around exit planning. Now, that's not even best practice, that's good practice. So that means that they've written some exit plans and they've tested some exit and BCM plans. It didn't mean that every critical supplier has got a BCM and exit plan, but it means they're getting some way there. So what this means is that 80% of the market had a gap when it comes to contingency for critical suppliers, which is pretty significant and striking gap. If you just visualize your own market and all of the firms in that market, 80% of the firms around you, if we're extrapolating the findings from this S code report, 80% of the firms in your market don't have a contingency when it comes to critical suppliers. That should be a little bit of a concern for firms. Okay, so finally, the end of our process, we come to assurance, oversight, and testing. I'm not going to dwell on this slide too much. So every firm will have the red lines that are really important to them. What kind of job can the firm do? Can they meet the regulator requirements and standards that you're required to meet? Do they satisfy your own internal business requirements, financial stability, for example? Where are they based? And then we've got everything else. And really what you're looking to gain from from all of those other areas are comfort, trust. You're looking to share some of the risks, and you're looking to collaborate with those suppliers. And that's where we see this link back to strategy. Just to harp on about that particular point, the link back to strategy. So for example, if your strategy states that we are a globally significant bank and we need to satisfy every ISO standard to the letter, then you will need all of your suppliers to be able to help you meet that strategic requirement. And so probably all of your suppliers will be, fairly tenured. They will probably be fairly large organizations. If, however, you're an organization that's perhaps more of a startup, you are more of a social enterprise, and your strategy is to work with local suppliers, perhaps firms who are able to meet some of your ESG, some of your corporate responsibility objectives, you will need to be much more flexible around the things that you're expecting those suppliers to be able to demonstrate with you. And you're just going to need to get comfortable with that. If your strategy is saying one thing, you can't expect your assurance, oversight, and testing of suppliers to say something else. And then I think this final slide really is talking about the importance of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration. So we've seen in regulation like DORA, there's a significant portion. One of the pillars of DORA, in fact, is information sharing. But I hadn't really, before I went to a resilience forum earlier this year, I hadn't really considered that as something that firms in the same market should be doing and how that might apply to third-party technology suppliers. And really, if we go back to the FCA's definition of resilience, it shows the importance of sector resilience. So the FCA states that it's the ability of firms and the sector, the financial sector in this case, to prevent, adapt, respond to, recover from, and learn from operational disruptions. And I think when we're thinking about our organization, a resilient firm in a non-resilient market is much less attractive to potential customers as an entirely resilient market. And so this is where collaboration is so important. And this graphic really nicely illustrates just very briefly what firms might be missing. So this was from a technology firm, Armis, who did a survey with UK finance organizations. UK finance is an industry body which represents banks and building societies, etc. in the UK. Armis surveyed their members, this was going back a year or so, to say, okay, which technology dependencies have you mapped in the first year? So these are dependencies on third parties in your technology infrastructure. As we can see, there's about 200 firms in this sector. 60%, or about 2/3 of firms, have successfully identified third-party technology dependencies in their organization. Great. Okay, that's all good. However, we then say, well, actually only 20% of the market, so 80% of the market, 4/5 of the financial services market, which looks after probably the most vulnerable customers, have not identified technology third parties beyond applications, so in the underlying infrastructure. You might say, so what, Dan? Why is that important? Well, the same firm identified that the majority of incidents occur in this underlying technology infrastructure. So that's 80% of firms in this market, when this graphic was taken at this point in time, were unaware of any vulnerabilities in their third-party technology infrastructure. So that's UK financial services, a pretty mature market. Again, if you start to consider the firms in your market, the sectors in which you operate, if 80% of the firms in that sector had not identified third parties in their underlying technology infrastructure, does that have the ability to create significant risk, to create a market-wide risk in the sector in which you operate? I think there's a pretty good case to say that it may well do. Okay, so we just run out of time. One final slide to show. Paul, do you know what this is?
I know it's a space telescope, but you'll have to remind me which one.
It is. So for those of you that have Netflix, there's a great documentary on the go. So this is the James Webb Telescope. I just wanted to finish on a positive by showing what you can do if you get this right. So the James Webb Telescope is a $9 billion US dollar project, 20 years in the making. They're sending this telescope out into deep space, and it's capturing images of galaxies, of nebulas and stars and faraway planets, and they're just the most amazing images, like looking into life itself. Do you know, Paul, how many third parties and fourth parties are involved in building the James Webb Telescope?
Absolutely no idea, but several, I would guess.
Several. So 300 different suppliers form part of the extended enterprise, made up of universities, colleges, technology firms, government agencies, providing all sorts of expertise and services and parts. Let me ask you a hypothetical question again, Paul, if I can use you. If you were in charge of the $9 billion project, how many vulnerabilities would you feel comfortable launching James Webb Telescope with?
I think ideally I'd go for none.
Zero vulnerability. Everyone picks that, so that's great. And do you have any idea how many vulnerabilities they actually had?
2?
No. So it had 344 single, not just vulnerabilities, but single points of failure, many of which came from those 300 suppliers. There were this bit at the bottom is a sun shield. So 200 were in this sun shield, but they still launched. The mission still ran, and it runs successfully. And the point I'm trying to make here is that they've done the work to identify who their suppliers were, who their suppliers' were, where they were vulnerable, what needed to be done to mitigate those risks, what needed to be done to work around any potential issues, and what just needed to be accepted. But they've done the work in understanding. And I think that's the message I'd like to get across to all of the firms who've been kind enough to attend today. Start by understanding where your third parties are, where your fourth parties are, and where you're vulnerable. Okay, thank you very much. We've got no time for questions. I apologize, but please feel free to connect with Paul and myself on LinkedIn, and yeah, we'll happily answer any questions. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.